Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to everybody on this special organized webinar by FIDIC and WWF as part of the Climate Week New York, on the crucial issue of nature positive infrastructure. For those who doesn't know who I am, my name is Dr. Nelson Ogunshake. I'm the Chief Executive of FIDIC, the International Federation of Consulting Engineers. FIDIC is the global representative body for National Association of Consulting Engineers and represent over 1 million engineering professionals and 40,000 firms around 100 countries worldwide. The building and infrastructure sector in which FIDIC members work contributes around 36 trillion to global GDP, so an important industry and business sector. What we want to use today's event for is to raise awareness and understanding of nature-based solutions as effective strategies for addressing climate change. To that end, FIDIC is delighted to be working in partnership with WWF and also our technical partner AECOM on our recently published playbook for nature-positive infrastructure development. This playbook, which we launched globally last week at our FIDIC Global Infrastructure Conference in Singapore, and which are proudly promoted today at this webinar, highlight the need for nature-positive infrastructure development to help drive change in our sector. Globally, there has been growing interest in the potential of nature-based solutions to complement, or in some cases, even replace traditional gray infrastructure. The playbook provides an insight to the global state of play and act as major catalyst for infrastructure approach for years to come as we progress towards new solution and construction techniques that are truly nature-based. It also represents the exciting starting point of much more ambitious goal of creating a living playbook that will continue to expand global recognition of nature-positive infrastructure approaches for years to come as we progress towards new solutions and construction techniques that are truly nature-positive. FIDIC believes that the playbook project demonstrates how a wide range of variety of stakeholders can work together to promote and show the differences that engineers and the wider infrastructure workforce can truly make in ensuring that infrastructure become part of the solution to the global challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss. To help us discuss some of the key issues, we have assembled an excellent panel of speakers for today's webinar. First, we will hear from FIDIC policy analyst Basma Isa, who will set out the context for today's event and explain the background to the FIDIC involvement and interest in nature-positive solutions. Then we'll have Ivan Ford, Senior Director for Sustainability Infrastructure and Finance at Worldwide Fund, and who will talk more about the partnership between FIDIC and the work they are doing around the nature-based solution and why they see it as important to partner with our sector. After Ivan, we have Joe Hughes, a Senior ESG Advisor Nature of AECOM, who will talk about their work as technical partner on the playbook and highlight why this is such an important issue to organizations like us and the wider infrastructure industry. So last but not least, we will hear from Rowan Power, consultant in the Economic Research Unit at United Nations Environmental Programme, UNEP, who will talk about some of the important work that they are doing as the leading global authority on the environment, including soon to be published piece of work which will complement the content of the FIDIC WWF playbook. After our speakers have spoken, we'll have some time for questions from the audience. So please be ready, post any question or point that chat, and we'll have a look at it in the chat. So as you can see, we have a knowledgeable group of panelists to help us guide us through the key issues around why nature-based solutions are effective strategy for addressing climate change and what we can all do collaboratively to make the change that are needed in our industry and beyond safeguard our environment and indeed the planet. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, FIDIC policy analyst, Basma Isa. Basma, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nelson. I would like to start by providing some essential context behind the partnership between FIDIC and WWF in our joint endeavor to develop the nature-positive infrastructure playbook. This collaboration reflects a profound recognition of the unique position and potential of the infrastructure industry to be a catalyst for positive change on a global scale. The infrastructure sector, as represented by FIDIC, wields immense influence and holds a vast reach within the industry. It plays a critical role in shaping our world today given how it enhances economic development and improves the quality of life for millions. However, as we all know, it is also a sector that at times has been marred by adverse environmental impacts and a perception of neglecting the vital needs of our natural world. In this paradox, we find not only a challenge, but an extraordinary opportunity as well. Infrastructure projects, often accompanied by substantial funding, hold the power to drive not only human progress, but also the restoration and conservation of our planet's ecosystems. This is very much where our partnership with WWF comes into play, an alliance that underscores our shared commitment to harnessing the positive potential of infrastructure. At FIDIC, we believe that the playbook for nature positive infrastructure demonstrates how a wide variety of stakeholders can work together to promote and show the difference that engineers and the wider infrastructure workforce can truly make in ensuring that infrastructure becomes part of the solution to the global challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss. As opposed to being in the bad press and having the reputation of being the problem, we want to shed light on the infrastructure sector being part of the solution. As opposed to being in the bad press, we also want to use the funds that are heavily invested in this sector to be used for nature conservation and restoration programs. I would also like to shed some light on the reasons that triggered the need to create the playbook. One of which is that while nature-positive approaches for infrastructure development may be high on the agenda, to date, there have not been many examples of such projects implemented globally. Also, while there seems to be considerable interest in the potential of nature-based solutions to replace or maybe complement certain functions of traditional gray infrastructure, there is an implementation bias towards several well-established approaches, such as reforestation, restoration of wetlands, or sustainable urban drainage systems. Another important incentive behind the development of the playbook also stemmed from the vital need to educate various stakeholders in the industry, as there is a limited understanding of the full range of benefits of nature-based solutions. Many of the co-benefits of these solutions are not well understood. They are not well measured or quantified, which is likely to be one of the reasons that's preventing them from further uptake and further implementation. And there is also a real need to continue to build the evidence base for nature-based solutions or nature-positive infrastructure and share examples implemented worldwide, like case studies and best practices that can present as a blueprint for a more sustainable and nature-positive industry. The playbook, in that essence, addresses all of these key areas and provides practical support to engineers and facilitates a shift in practitioner norms towards nature-positive infrastructure development. The key principles and best practices and success stories, which were built on a study of more than 200 projects, highlight the potential for nature-based solutions to contribute to sustainable development, which is really one of the main core values of FIDIC. The information and the examples that we have outlined in the playbook will definitely enable all those who read it and who use it to gain a deeper understanding and a deeper knowledge of the subject and of the practical applications and benefits of nature-based solutions. Therefore, I would encourage everyone to download the playbook, and I'm sure you'll find it enlightening. Thank you for your participation, and I hope you enjoyed the dialogue. Back to you, Nelson.
Thanks very much, Basma. It's interesting you mentioned that it is available. I do recall when this was launched in Singapore last week. It was, the room was full up. A lot of people are keen to talk about it. And I understand the document is being downloaded about 2,000 people around the world. So let's assume that, there's going to pick up momentum. It is my pleasure now to invite, Ivan to take up the floor, which is Senior Director for Sustainable Infrastructure and Finance at Worldwide Fund. Even the floor is yours. It was good to see you in Singapore last week. Hope you enjoy it. So let's have your take.
Thank you, Nelson. Thank you very much. Great to see you in Singapore as well. And Basma, thank you for those words. I just want to spend a few moments discussing the evolution of the partnership between WWF and FIDIC, which has led to this this product. A little over 2 years ago, WWF and FIDIC began a dialogue just prior, in fact, to the climate COP26. FIDIC at the time, as representing the engineering community, was developing its climate charter, and began a series of conversations with WWF about various approaches to low carbon infrastructure, to the pathway to net zero, and nature-based solutions. And while at first glance, to perhaps many of you in the audience today, it may seem like a bit of an odd partnership, if you will, between the conservation and engineering communities, we were quick, I think, between both parties to recognize the power of our respective institutions and our respective brands to address the dual crises, right, of climate change and biodiversity loss. And we recognize that between our respective institutions, our networks, our members, and the interests that are carried by our respective members, that we had an opportunity to address a really critical moment in time with respect to infrastructure development and frankly, infrastructure finance. Over the course of the 2 years, culminating really today, WWF, FIDIC, and its technical partner, AECOM, have pursued this idea of developing and promoting this playbook for nature-positive infrastructure. Its goal is ambitious. We believe that it is a product that will contribute to what is a very active and very live dialogue about the role of nature positivity and nature-based solutions in infrastructure development and infrastructure planning. And frankly, we feel like there's a fantastic role between the conservation communities and the engineering communities to work more closely together. The engineering community can imagine the impossible, can develop and deliver and design new infrastructure that's demanded of us by a changing planet. The conservation community, and WWF in particular, really stands at the forefront of thinking about the ways that we can achieve nature-positive infrastructure in harmony with sustainable development and economic development goals. And the approach that we've taken is to put this playbook together to facilitate dialogue and opportunity for the engineering community, to use it as a practical tool and guide for approaching ways to develop and implement nature-positive infrastructure. So I'm very pleased that both FIDIC and WWF, as global organizations with reach in hundreds of countries, with thousands, if not millions of members, have an opportunity to review, assess, and utilize this playbook. My hope is that it's valuable and it's well received by the community, and that there will be future versions. So I look forward to the conversation today. Nelson, and back to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ivan. It's interesting that, people may probably think, that we are on the opposite side of it. I think we are really very much aligned in our thinking. The conservationists and really the engineering community, as a fellow of the Institute of Civil Engineering, one of the things we were taught about is harnessing the power of nature to make sure we provide a solution that is sustainable in the future. So that's really enshrined in our philosophy as an engineer. So I'm really pleased that this alliance is coming together. I'm very pleased to be in your office in Washington, D.C. early this year with the president. When you looked around and you can see what WWF is doing, that we're very much in alignment. So I'll come back to you later on, Ivan, in terms of how we can work closer together. I can see real opportunity in that. It's now my pleasure to introduce Jo Hill. She is the Senior ESG Advisor Nature at AECOM. And for those who doesn't know, AECOM perhaps is the largest consulting engineering firm in the world, with over 90,000 professionals around the world. So Jo, I understand we're not far from each other. I'm in London, you're in London. So the floor is yours. So tell us your story, Jo.
Thank you very much. And hello, welcome to everybody. It's really nice to have an opportunity to speak to you today as part of the Climate Work Week New York City event. So AECOM was delighted to work with FIDIC and WWF on this playbook. I sit within the part of the business that tries to promote nature across our engineering colleagues. So to me, this was a marvelous opportunity to discuss some of the day-to-day challenges that I and my colleagues face in driving nature positive infrastructure across the business. And I think this playbook takes a really big step in doing that. And hopefully all of those listening today and those who've looked at the playbook will agree and will engage with what we've tried to achieve. But I wanted just to tell you for a few minutes a little bit about the playbook, what it looks like, how it's intended to be used, a little bit about the approach we took, and then perhaps an opportunity for us to explain a little bit about why we took that approach and why some of the terms that are used in the playbook, some of the structure in the playbook came about as a result of the research. So as Basma said, the playbook came from research. So we looked for examples of nature positive infrastructure that had been created across the globe. And we looked very hard across all of the platforms that we could. We looked at websites, we looked at publications, we looked at academic research. We reached out across our own networks, across WWF and FIDIC's networks, to try to get as many examples as we could of nature positive infrastructure that had been implemented or was indeed planned to be implemented across the globe. And in the end, we had 400 to 500 different projects come to our attention. And of those, around 200 of them had adequate clarity and detail for us to actually take them forward for research as part of the playbook. And once we had seen what we had, we were then able to look at the most useful structure for the playbook. This is designed, as we've all said, to be a useful document that people can go into and find something that helps them to play their part as part of this transition towards more nature positive infrastructure. So it needed to work for engineers, for developers, for anyone with an interest in this area. So in the end, the structure that we took was a sort of multi-matrix structure. So the playbook operates by sector, by the benefit, and also by the solution. So you can come at it at any number of different ways, depending on your initial point of curiosity, let's say, or your initial point of need. We wanted the playbook to be very short. We wanted it to be snappy. We wanted it to spark ideas, to get you thinking harder, to get people moving on to more detailed information. At the end of the day, it's fallen not far short of 100 pages, including the case studies we included at the end. But I would argue that it could have been far longer. Hopefully, most of you will look at it and think, oh, if only you told us a bit more about this or about that. And that, as we've already said, is what we would really encourage you to do. Please tell us, what else would you like to be there? Contribute ideas. What projects are you aware of that for whatever reason we didn't find? But anyway, we had our 200 projects. We also did a literature review, a desk-based study to try and pull up more context, more sense of trend and drivers around the nature positive infrastructure, the nature-based solution space. We took all of that, as I say, and we presented it in a short report that, as well as the case studies at the end, just has 5 chapters. So the first one is the introduction. What is the playbook about? What were the objectives, as Basma has already mentioned, and how it's intended to be used, and also, importantly, a definition of terms. This is an area which people talk a lot about, they write about, but there's actually very little definition of terms, or where there has been definition, usually multiple. There's a sense that people are not necessarily engaging with the detail. Then we move on to talking about the sectors. From our study of the case studies and examples that we were looking at, we defined the sectors for the purposes of this document. We could all have a discussion about which sectors should have been recognised, but we chose to keep it simple, and we just identified 5 headline sectors. So we had transport, energy, water and wastewater, the built environment, buildings and public spaces, and then coastal, particularly coastal protection. But recognising that different nature positive infrastructure would be used, different solutions would be used, and potentially different benefits would be sought as different challenges were addressed, we then produced subsectors or a typology beneath those sectors that allow people to look, for example, at roads or at renewable energy or whatever their particular area of interest might be. The benefits, again, came out of the results of the research. So what we found was that typically there were 3 core benefits or key benefits that were identified by the proponents of the different types of nature positive infrastructure. And these were either biodiversity, carbon, or resilience. And those were very much, one or more of those were typically chosen as the rationale, if you like, or the key driving benefit that was sought, the key objective of the nature positive infrastructure initiative. And then there were, of course, a number of secondary or additional benefits or co-benefits, we might say, that were identified. And we categorized these broadly into 3 categories to keep it simple. So we had other environmental benefits, for example, air quality, water quality. Then we also had economic benefits, which was quite wide-ranging. Perhaps it was cheaper, perhaps it enhanced the value of the land, etc., provided jobs. And then the last one was social benefits. We all know that nature positive infrastructure will quite often have elements of value in terms of aesthetics and in terms of public open space. So that was our overall structure. The solutions then are the things that were most commonly spoken about. And I think, and I'd be interested to see what you say, people who've looked at the playbook, perhaps the categorization of the solutions is perhaps the area where people have most to say. This was very much reflective, not so much of what we thought when we first started the project, but what we actually found from the research. What were people calling these solutions? What types of names were they using? And remember, we had deliberately worked to make this a global document. So we were reaching out into as many different continents, regions, and countries and jurisdictions as we could to try to get a sense of what was happening all the way across the world, and then categorize it in a structure that made it simple for anybody to look at, but applicable for anybody, whatever their point of context or point of reference. So we basically put them into 2 main categories. There's the dry and the wet. You know, there's the inland, and then there's the coastal and riverine. But within that, there's all the types of nature-based solutions or nature-positive infrastructure elements that most of you will have thought of or have seen, with a quick introduction to what they might look like. And the document is not intended to give you detail. It's not intended to tell you how best to get good mangrove restoration or how to design the best bridge over a road. We did include a section on additional resources of the documentation that we found most useful, or most commonly cross-referenced by the examples we looked at. But this is not intended to be, oh my goodness, I want to create a coral reef. How do I do that? It's not that type of document. It's too short. But at the end, we did include a limited number of case studies, both of projects that have been implemented, which we felt demonstrated some of the best of what we saw across our research, but also some examples of sort of pre-implementation or studies around implementation that really broadened out the understanding of nature positive infrastructure. But we also, of course, reflected on what insights did we get. At the end of this research, what is the state of nature positive infrastructure today? And Basma has rightly said, not as great as we thought when we went into this. We're just not seeing a real grasp of the ambition, of the amazing benefits that can come from a really close look at nature positive infrastructure. So this playbook is step 1. This playbook is the beginning of an exciting, and as Evan said, very ambitious journey that FIDIC is really excited and AECOM has been very pleased to be part of. Let's see what the next steps look like. Thank you. Back to you, Nelson.
Thank you very much, Jo, for that insightful view on the structure, the content, the categorization, the benefits, and really more in terms of, easy a one-off agenda, or do we need to look at it going forward as a dynamic document, in which case we need to look at, version 2, version 3, version 4, as we have more input from others in the industry later. So it's really my pleasure now to bring out the last speaker, which is Rowan Palmer, consultant in the Economic Research Unit at the United Nations Environmental Programme in Geneva. So Rowan, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Nelson, and thanks to FIDIC and WWF for inviting me to join the event today and talk a little bit about some work that we're doing at the UN Environment Programme that I think really complements very nicely the playbook and the work of FIDIC and WWF. So what I'm speaking about today is a new UNEP report that we have coming out called A Nature-Based Infrastructure, How Natural Infrastructure Solutions Can Address Sustainable Development Challenges and the Triple Planetary Crisis. This is a report we've developed jointly with the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford and with UN Ops as well. And it presents original research on the potential contribution of nature-based infrastructure to global sustainable development agendas, and specifically to the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and the Global Biodiversity Framework. And in the terms of the SDGs and the Global Biodiversity Framework, the report quantifies the potential contributions at the target level. And as with the methodology of the playbook, it's based on a review of existing examples of nature-based infrastructure. I mean, we've heard the other speakers talking about nature-positive infrastructure. We talk about nature-based infrastructure. Maybe there's some small differences in scope, but I think yeah, as far as today's discussion goes, we're talking basically about the same thing. So our research has identified 5 functions through which nature can deliver infrastructure-related benefits. The first is by delivering infrastructure services directly. So these are cases where nature-based infrastructure might be able to replace a built asset. The second is enhancing delivery of services by built assets, so complementing built assets. The third is protecting assets from the impacts of climate change and other disasters. The fourth is benefiting infrastructure workforces. And the last one is providing a wide array of multiple additional economic, environmental, and social benefits beyond the primary intended infrastructure service. So some of these benefits and services derived from nature-based infrastructure are a bit more obvious and well known, but others are not. And I think it was Basma who mentioned in her initial intervention this implementation bias, where we tend to see lots of examples of certain types of NBI and not so many of other types. So part of the purpose of this report is really to highlight to policymakers in particular the full extent of the potential benefits from the use of NBI, and in quantitative terms, these are quite significant. Our research finds that in 8 sectors, NBI can influence up to 79% of the 169 SDG targets across all 17 of the goals. And when combined with built infrastructure, the influence reaches 95% of the targets. And this is a greater impact than either built infrastructure or nature-based infrastructure can have by itself. And then for any of these individual sectors that we looked at, the deployment of NBI, nature-based infrastructure, in conjunction with built infrastructure can influence anywhere from 25 to 45% more SDG targets. It varies depending on the sector, than either built infrastructure alone or nature-based infrastructure alone could. And this is really due largely to the multiple additional benefits or co-benefits that can be derived from NBI. And then in terms of the Global Biodiversity Framework, NBI can influence 75% or 70% of the targets and then contribute to both mitigation and adaptation goals under the Paris Agreement. And our report argues that NBI is the only type of infrastructure intervention that can contribute to simultaneous positive progress on all three of these agendas, the SDGs, Paris Agreement, and the GBF. And this is really due to the fact that NBI must, by definition, include some form of biodiversity benefit. So this analysis is really all about the potential of NBI. We know, and we've heard from the other speakers, that this potential is a long way from being fully realized. There are a lot of barriers to realizing these positive impacts, and I think this is where the playbook comes in as an excellent complement to our report, really by providing a wealth of details and more specifics and in-depth examples of best practices, how some of the barriers have been overcome, and this kind of information that really can help at the practitioner level, because essentially our report is addressing a lot of the why of NBI and really putting it in terms of how it can help governments and policymakers achieve their high-level, sort of multilaterally agreed targets, and hopefully address and sort of kickstart some of this needed ambition that Jo just mentioned in her remarks. And then the playbook complements it nicely, I think, by going into a lot more detail on what these benefits look like on the ground, and really getting into the how to do good nature-based and nature-positive infrastructure. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ron, for that your contribution to the discussion. We've got quite a lot of questions coming from the floor, which is very good. So that should keep us entertained in terms of how we address that. But before I pick up the question from the floor, perhaps if I can take the undue advantage of being the MC and try and sort of rattle the cages of all the panelists with my few questions. Let me start with Ron, you're the last one who spoke, so I think I'm going to do it in reverse of that while you're still fresh. It sounds like a positive development, but how would you respond? Let me just put it this way. How do you think we can best utilize the research done by both FIDIC and UNF to create a momentum for nature-positive infrastructure? How can we leverage on what you guys are doing and what WWF are doing with FIDIC? How can we leverage on that?
I think if we look at the two sort of audiences for our organizations and these two reports in particular, we're our constituency is typically governments and particularly national governments, whereas FIDIC has access to this huge network of practitioners and engineers and more technical people on the ground. So I think there's a huge amount of complementarity there, and I think one of the issues that we identified in our research, and I think Jo mentioned as well, is just lacking, the number of good examples that we need to get the data and the information that we need to sort of make it easier to implement more nature-based infrastructure in the future. So I think, if we can work together to, on one hand, inspire decision makers and practitioners to innovate and take more chances and basically do more nature-based infrastructure solutions, then it's going to help us to build that evidence base that we need. That's going to then make things easier as momentum grows.
Okay, thanks very much. Let me come back into Jo. Your presentation really addressed some of the questions I was going to talk about earlier on. But one particular question I have is that, if somebody listening to this sounds like a positive development, but how would you respond to the argument that this is going to cost more if we're to do all the recommendations coming through? How do we respond to the idea it's going to cost more?
I suppose it comes from the sort of context that we're talking about. I mean, one of the things that one's hearing quite a lot now is the way that cost benefit doesn't take account of some of the things that most of us would hope it would. It's not a matter of can we afford to do this, it's can we afford not to. And I think one of the things we've mentioned quite a lot is around the benefits or co-benefits of a nature-positive, nature-based approach, because if you look at these things as natural capital, then the benefit can be extraordinary, and that more than outweighs the cost. But having said that, I accept that there will be, you know, certainly today, talking today, let's hope in the future maybe things shift a little more towards valuing natural capital a bit more easily. But if you're talking today and you're just talking dollars, and I need my dollars today to pay for this, well, one of the things that certainly is the case is that nature positive infrastructure or nature-based solutions may not be more costly, either in terms of the construction or in terms of the operation. And I think one of the things that we really need as an organization, as a society going forward, is actually a little bit more exploration of that. There are some really good examples of where people have demonstrated quite extraordinary cost savings by moving down, you know, to work with nature rather than potentially against it. And that's even before you're talking about, you know, future climate change and the resilience of the infrastructure you're creating and how a more sustainable approach might support with the resilience there. But I think, yes, I think we need more information. Anybody who says this is going to cost more, how I'm going to do it, I have some sympathy with you, because we really don't know. But I think a lot of people are starting to look at this. And I think going forward, many of us will be involved in initiatives that will be actually giving us some clear statistics that will help us to understand, you know, does this add cost, even if you don't look at the benefits that it will undoubtedly produce.
Yeah, thanks very much there. I'm going to come across to Eva now. You know, I think the question, I mean, your presentation about the partnership, as of course, I do know a lot about the partnership. I signed the agreement. I know exactly what it is, and I can understand the benefit. But for the audience who are not really privileged into the details, question I was going to put across to you, what was the motivation for developing the playbook? Yes, of course, FIDIC were talking about the climate change charter, which we put out in there. And this was the trigger point by our Sustainability Development Committee. And they came up with the idea we need to talk to you guys. But from your point of view as WWF, what was the motivation for developing the playbook? And what need do you see it serving now from your point of view? A lot has been said. What you need, does it need to be serving beyond having it done now? Back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nelson. That's absolutely right. The motivation was really driven by what we were hearing from our collective communities, and frankly, in our early conversations with FIDIC, what FIDIC was telling us, the engineering community was interested in. We've come to a point in time where terms like nature-positive infrastructure, nature-based solutions, biodiversity net gain are being used widely, but as the panelists just discussed, there's not total uniformity in understanding what the definitional elements of those terms. But the engineering community, I think, has reached a point where delivering sustainable infrastructure necessitates a different approach to design and development. The choice of the word playbook is very deliberate. This was not meant to be a static document. It really, I think the power of the playbook and frankly, the success of the playbook rests in its utilization. What we're hearing from our respective communities is that there's a need for approaching the way infrastructure is designed and developed differently to address the challenges that we've just discussed today. I'm very bullish, as I said at the outset, on this partnership between WWF and FIDIC, because I think we have an opportunity through documents like the playbook, through engagement with our country counterparts and our membership organizations to unpack what these definitions mean, put them into practice, and add to the document that we've developed in order to serve our respective communities. Success is utilization, really, and motivation is developing something that responds to the questions and queries of our respective constituents. And I hope that this document will be used. My call to the participants on this call today is to help us answer some of the questions that we've just discussed. Please submit more cases, help us better identify how to value natural capital and incorporate that valuation into infrastructure development and design, and let it be reflected in a version 2 or version 3 of the playbook. And if it's useful to the engineering community, we'll hear. And if it's not useful, we'd also like to hear. And that's really at the heart of why we developed this and what the motivation for putting the playbook was in the first place. Thanks.
Thanks very much, everyone. I'm going to bring Basma into now. You started the whole conversation. And the question, I probably have the answer to this, but again, For when you are in doubt, you ask a question. You feel that you can explain on it. And for those who are listening, there's a lot of questions coming from the floor. We'll pick them up in a bit. But let me just put this question to you. Of course, FIDIC has got over 1 million engineers around the world, 40,000 companies, 92 countries around the world. What would you like the FIDIC membership and the community to do with the playbook document? What would you be recommending to members? Each and every one of them, down to the single individual engineer. So you take it from the corporate level, you down to project level, and down to individual level, across the region, across the country. What would you want members to do with it? That's fine.
I would actually build on what Evan was saying, and I wouldn't just want to see our members and the community using it as a guide for practitioners. I would want to see them engaging actively in it, diving into the playbook, studying the principles, applying it, and giving us feedback. As we said, it's a living document, and the only way we can evolve it and develop it is when we get the feedback from the people who actually get to practice what's in the playbook. We want them to share the knowledge in their respective communities, locally, internationally. We want to see them advocating for the change that's in the playbook. And all of this is also going to contribute to version 2 and 3, and we will not be able to develop the new versions unless we get this feedback from them. So it's the feedback, it's the contribution, not just the implementation. This is the kind of support that we want to see from our members and the community, the implementation and the feedback. And this is what's going to help us as well to develop more versions that is going to help them in their journey towards a nature positive infrastructure.
Yeah, but Basma, I hear you loud and clear. More feedback which should help us to build the next chapter, next volume, next version. Now let's start picking up questions from the floor. There's a lot of questions, and Andy, thank you very much for sort of sanitizing the question and putting them across to me in a way that is manageable. The first question is from Robert Ott. So how do you respond when a decision maker bring up the topic of increasing price for nature positive project? What would you go to in terms of your response to the question of expensive? Now I know Joe talked about it earlier on. Let me bring Rowan back into it. Rowan, what is your view when people say it's going to cost more? Of course, will it cost more? Who's going to pay for it? How do we do the business case? How do we put the message across to those people who have that view rather than try and see how we can use nature-based to mitigate and address the issue? Rowan, what's your view on the subject?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I mean, one, as Joe mentioned, is we do have quite clear evidence of many cases where it's simply not more expensive, and there are significant cost benefits and economic benefits from using a nature-based solution versus a built solution. So I guess first, point them to the existing evidence, and then I think the second part is really, about the need to shift our mindset and think about how we value the benefit, really understanding the broad range of benefits and placing a value on them. Some of them may be longer term, some of them may be beyond sort of the primary intended infrastructure service, but it's really important that we recognize those and capture them and factor them into the decision making, because ultimately, there may be solutions where the nature-based option is just clear-cut, has a cost advantage, but there are others where it won't. But by really understanding and factoring in that true range of benefits, that's how we're going to make those type of solutions sort of bankable and viable in the long term.
Okay, thanks very much. There's two questions. This individual is being greedy. Is Julian Grace Sanders. 2 questions. I'm going to put 2 questions to 2 of you. The first one is, how do you measure or assess social and environmental impact? I think I'll put that to Joe. And then the second question from the same individual, you only get a bite at this cherry, not twice, but I'm giving you the second opportunity. Second question is, have you identified policy changes and additions that may be necessary to encourage implementation of this sort of nature-based solution? First one is assessing and measuring social value. So George, you want to pick the second one up? And then Evan, if you pick the second one, is that okay?
Absolutely. So how do you measure the impact? I mean, one of the things that we actually found quite challenging to unravel is the fact that typically with infrastructure projects, they are going in many jurisdictions through a form of environmental assessment. So there you are looking at the impacts you're hoping to avoid, you're hoping to mitigate, you're hoping to compensate or offset. And then if you're looking at a nature positive infrastructure, where perhaps nature is much more intrinsic to the design and nature and a more natural approach has been considered, where do you draw the boundaries within that impact assessment? So I think actually at a sort of theoretical level, that's a very interesting question. But I suspect that the answer is perhaps around the positive impacts. So this is perhaps somebody alluding again to the natural capital approach, where you actually can measure in a quantifiable manner that can be set against cost, typical cost currency, hard cash costs. You can actually measure the environmental and social benefits. Now, one of the challenges, of course, we have is that in different jurisdictions or different regions, you have different natural capital approaches, which will always be the case, because depending on where you are in the world, the ecosystem services, the natural capital will be valued differently, will sit within different contexts. But that doesn't mean that one shouldn't start doing that and measuring the positive, the real positives, the benefits, the positive impacts of infrastructure needs to come if we're going to move ourselves towards the nature positive infrastructure that we need. And we have time. I mean, there are reports saying that over 75% of the infrastructure that the world will have in 2050 hasn't even been considered yet. So we have a real opportunity just within the next 25 years or so to transform what infrastructure looks like.
So, Joe, what I'm hearing from you is we've still got a long way to go. If 75% of what is required in 2050 is yet to be built, so we can actually look at in the new build and build nature positive solution, or there may be opportunity to retrofit existing and see where we can do mitigation strategy to put on. So the second question on the same individual goes across to Evan. The question was, have you identified policy changes, addition that may be necessary to encourage implementation? Is there any policy changes that planners and government and those who assesses infrastructure need to put in place so that they can have maximum impact on solution?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. Thank you for asking it, and it dovetails nicely from Joe's previous comments. We do have time. I'd like to think that we should be able to take advantage of the temporal gap and fiscal gap, the infrastructure financing gap that exists out there. There will be a lot more infrastructure coming in the future, and there are a series of changes that are policy related that I think are required in order to enable the type of infrastructure that we're talking about to be put in place. I'll point to one in particular that I think is very relevant and very important, and it would fall underneath this category of facilitating enabling conditions, and that's procurement. I think procurement is at the heart of almost everything with respect to infrastructure development and infrastructure design. And until we approach infrastructure procurement with an eye towards advantaging sustainability and building sustainable principles into the way infrastructure is procured, I think we'll see sort of the business as usual case prevail. Procurement drives the way infrastructure is developed and ultimately deployed on the ground, and policy changes are required to approach infrastructure procurement a bit differently. And that means working with governments, it means working with organizations like ours, certainly with the engineering community, to push forward the best practices that change the way procurement norms and standards are delivered on the ground. That should hopefully lead to a bit of a groundswell or sea change in the way infrastructure ultimately is developed. But current procurement practices, I think, are due for reform and due for change. I'd love through the playbook in a version 2 to address procurement standards and procurement reform and build around that this concept of financing and motivating or stimulating new development as a function of this financing gap. But I think a key driver here in policy reform and change with respect to enabling conditions is approaching procurement differently than we have in the past.
Evan, thank you very much. It sounds as if you've been listening to my conversation with the Multilateral Development Bank Because when we finished the conference last week in Singapore, I did a 4-hour flight across into ADB. And when I got to ADB, I met 8 multilateral development banks, all of their chief procurement officer, including Enzo De Laurenti. And guess what? The subject of our procurement policy was on top of the agenda, that they need to look at more of the subjective side rather than pure hard money side of it. And so it seems to me that you are really on the money on the issue about policy changing on procurement. And believe it or not, the World Bank is taking a lead on that. And I think there may be a need for us to go and speak to the World Bank. How can we fast track this more into the new procurement pipeline coming through? So you are really onto that. I do believe that procurement is a big area to change because, as Joe said, when you do the old, cost benefit analysis, if you can't put any money to it, it's always difficult to say this is very subjective. But now the banks are talking green infrastructure. They're talking about investable assets. Even the private pension people are looking at, we want to go, green asset class. So if this can be built into the procurement process, I think there will be a shift in the attitude. And I do believe that's an area to pursue. There's a question that's just come through from Michael Davis, and I'm going to play it back. He said, the playbook is aimed at current practitioners. What needed in terms of building skill for upcoming engineers and students? So in essence, how do we ensure that the engineers of the future have these skills and understanding opportunity to promote, either through the FIDIC credentialing or what we are doing in terms of FIDIC Academy? Now, I believe the message here is the traditional training required for engineers need rescoping. And as an engineer, I don't take it as an insult. I think there's a fundamental need for us to revisit and to make sure we engender this in. So let me bring the practitioners as Joe. What do we need to do in looking at the way we teach our young one coming into the industry? Because I can tell you, majority of them now, they want to get involved with sustainable infrastructure development. They're looking at nature-based solutions, and I'm asking the question, are we doing enough, or do we need to revisit the basic principle of education that we give those young people coming out of industry so they can think about nature-based solution as part of issue of addressing the sustainability development goal? Joe, what do you think we need to do?
Absolutely. I think, to be honest, we're already beginning to see a shift in the training courses in some countries. Yeah. And I think that's probably come from the sort of work of FIDIC and the general raising of sustainability. I mean, I'm sure everybody finds that younger people today have quite an extraordinary understanding of sustainability. And it's actually, the sort of middle leaders in organizations, those, dare I say it, in their 50s, 60s, who perhaps maybe even in their late 40s, who sort of don't get it, in inverted commas. So I think we shouldn't say that all of the change needs to come about in that initial learning. After all, being an engineer is something you learn every day, don't you? And I think there needs to be training across the practicing profession as well as those who are perhaps learning to come into the profession. And that is where organizations like FIDIC and others are so key, because you can actually, you're introducing this to your members. There can, I'm sure, be some training around this across the membership to ensure that those who practice, who maybe didn't have the opportunity when they were training, this wasn't, sustainable infrastructure wasn't something that they thought about. But certainly I know from my own experience of being asked to talk to engineering organizations, there is indeed a real appetite responding, I think, to students' awareness of what needs to change in the world. We still have ideological sort of student initiatives these days, don't we? But I think a lot of the challenge is around ensuring that those who've been practicing for many years, who have learned from their experience of working on more traditional infrastructure, how do we help them to transition? How do we help them to lead their organizations towards playing their part in the more nature positive infrastructure world that we're all hoping to move toward?
Thanks, Joe. I know, Basma, you just finished your master's degree in sustainability, and I'm going to bring it to the question. But before I do so, I want to go back to it. Even I do know, as part of the conversation we are talking with WWF, one of the areas you're looking at is how do we educate particular people in one part of the world where there is a keen interest. And I understand that you have an initiative where, training material through FIDIC Academy can be delivered to effectively address some of these issues, to give those who are mature in the market, perhaps didn't get the grounding on sustainability, can actually look at other things that's being done. Ivan, do you want to share that with us? How are we working or thinking of working with you to try and get that message across through the FIDIC Academy?
Sure. Thank you for asking that question, Nelson. First of all, the FIDIC Academy platform is an extraordinary platform. It is a very user-friendly, very robust platform to deliver a whole suite of training modules tailored to a variety of interests that the engineering community may have. So I'm very, very pleased to have spent some time working through and approaching the FIDIC Academy platform. And to your question specifically, you're absolutely right. WWF is engaged through a program funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development called ALIGN, which really is meant to service and address the development of linear infrastructure safeguards, particularly for projects in Asia. We have 3 target countries in which we're working: Mongolia, India, and Nepal. We're hoping to utilize the FIDIC Academy platform to roll out a series of trainings related to topics like road ecology. Some of you may be familiar with that topic, others maybe not. Essentially, the development and deployment of wildlife crossings, for example, on linear infrastructure. Aquatic passageways is another one. We have a suite of trainings. I think there are 17 or 18 that have already been developed, and we're currently working with FIDIC Academy to put those up on that platform and to make them readily available for practitioners. They're on demand, demand-based, demand-driven. They can be downloaded and taken at their leisure. And eventually, we hope to incorporate accreditation with those. So I thank you again, Nelson, for bringing it up. The platform is a fantastic resource and tool to deliver and deploy trainings associated with sustainability writ large. And in our case, we're hoping to use this project that I mentioned as sort of a pilot run to deliver additional trainings on the intersection of conservation and infrastructure development to the engineering community.
Okay, thanks very much, Ivan. I mean, Basma, you just correct me. I'm not outing you on this. You just completed your master's degree. Whilst I consider you to be a mature student like myself, going back to try and top up as one does, because I've always believed that you only stop learning the day you pass on. As long as you're alive, you are learning every day, as I do. Looking through now, do you think there's any merit in doing a certification program that really gets engineers who haven't got the basic grounding in this particular nature-based solution, that can actually look at a sustainability program where it can be applied for those who are in practice, and they can top it up, through the certification? Is there any merit in doing that? Or is the only solution to go and do an MSc or whatever it is? What is the other alternative solution that can be done? Basman.
I think that capacity building and training is incredibly important. There will always be room, as you said, Nelson, for learning and for improvement, and building on the capacity of engineers, architects, and infrastructure professionals to understand and implement the nature positive approaches is absolutely essential. Here, training and education programs can play a real vital role. And the research and innovation that is always being new every day, and the advancing nature-based solutions that we see will always create the need for the capacity building and the training. So I believe that there is always room for that. And as Joe was mentioning, the young generations have better understanding of sustainability and the requirements of nature-based solutions and how important it is. And I think this facilitates how they would accept using a document like the playbook. And this is why it is important. We want it to be practiced on the different levels of engineers with different levels of expertise, beginners and experienced. And the more there is room to learn, the more there will be room for more feedback that we can get.
Okay, thank you. There's a few more questions coming through from the floor. And I'm just wondering whether we should continue. And I'm sure that you guys are ready to answer the question. There's a question from here. He said, the life cycle, this is from Tuk Lal Adkiri. I hope I've got the name right. He said, the life cycle cost of a nature positive solution will be low. but it requires more effort for maintenance and service life. What criteria can be critical, whether nature positive or conventional solution should be adopted? Joe, is that something that you can jump in and address that?
That is a really good question, and it's something that I think about and talk about. I think it's very specific to the solution we're talking about. It's hard to make a sort of general response on that. And certainly there are examples, as I mentioned earlier, where the maintenance has not actually been more onerous or more costly, or perhaps even, dare I say, less well rehearsed than with more traditional infrastructure. But I think that's almost impossible to answer today, but I think it is the sort of question that we all need to be asking ourselves, and getting more information. It really does play to the point that we've all made repeatedly, that we're not going to really see the enhanced adoption of nature positive infrastructure until we have some stronger statistics about some of these really key questions that engineers and investors are going to be asking. But yeah, really good question.
Thanks, Joe. Well, I'm mindful we're going to try and wrap up in about 5 to 6 minutes. Just before we do that, I'm going to go through all the panelists. I'm asking a very simple question. What would be one takeaway and that you would like to see as a result of this webinar? Bearing in mind that we've launched the book in Singapore, and over 2,000 of it been downloaded. It's on LinkedIn, it's on social media. We are now making it available, and Andy informed me quite correctly that there will be a press release going out in the next couple of days to back this thing up. And it is a free issue, it's downloadable. So the question I'm putting across to each and every one of you, what would be one sentence that you want to leave with us to the audience as to the benefit of this playbook? I understand the point that's been said by Evan, that it's going to be dynamic and something user-friendly, a reference point. But more important, we need to use it. We need feedback to help us to move it forward. So let me start with Evan. What would be your one advice that you want to give to all the audience, both those who are listening right now and those who's going to listen later on, because this particular webinar will be kept on our YouTube for other people who want to listen to it later on. So what's your one advice or message you want to get across? Evan?
Thank you. The piece of advice is exactly as you said, Nelson, and as I said at the top of the call, we want your feedback. Use it, pick it apart, and contribute. Its value rests in the utilization of the document. I encourage everybody to spend some time with it and to contribute more cases. It will grow in strength as more cases are developed to answer some of the questions we've been tackling today. Thanks, Nelson.
Thank you. Rowan, your publication is coming out. This publication is already out. There is synergy between what you are publishing and what's already been published, and the comment to you is exactly the same. How best can we leverage on this conversation, and how do we take it forward? What is your one sentence to leave off with?
Yeah, the main thing with our report is we really, we hope it inspires people to think differently about how we deliver infrastructure services, and about the potential for what kind of services we can deliver through infrastructure investments. And like Evan, I think that one of the major barriers is just lack of information and data. So I really would also back his point about the sort of feedback and the interaction with the practitioner community, and this is going to help us move things forward in the longer term.
Okay, thank you very much. Basma, what is your one sentence that you want to leave with your audience here and the community of WWF and the community of FIDIC?
Well, first to clarify, Nelson, what I just finalized was my CFA in ESG as a policy analyst. And my master's in green economy is still going. The one I finished was the sustainability a long time ago. And going back to my last message, well, my message would be for our FIDIC members and our community. I would really encourage them to engage actively and to share the knowledge, to advocate for the change that we are asking for through the playbook, and to collaborate with us, and to give us their feedback to help us to develop it even more.
Okay, I'm going to bring Joy in, but before I bring Joy, let me just give Andy Walker a bit of a warning. because I know he's in the background. He's a media guru, the man who knows how to talk to the politician, who knows how to string the world together. And I'm going to come back to you because we have the New York Climate Week going on, and just think about what is the message, Andy, that we should be getting across to the politician and those people who are in New York cuddling up to each other. So I'll come back to you, Andy, with that. So Joe, your last sentence and comment to the audience and to those who are out there listening to us. What's your comment?
Have a look at the playbook, find something you don't know about, something you don't know very much about, maybe a solution you haven't heard anything about before, and just explore your curiosity. Just realize that there's so much more we could be doing.
Thank you very much. Mr. Walker, I think you can join the party, and let's have your view. If we are going to talk to the politician, we're going to ask for a seat at the table. What message should be conveying to those people, whether the weather is wet or dry in New York? I don't care. What should be our message to these people as they go gallivanting around New York by the United Nations, talking about the issue that we've been talking about? What message should we be conveying to them? Mr. Walker.
I think the thing that's clear to me from listening to everyone in this meeting today is how vital these issues are to the future of our world. I hope that the politicians realise that. They have to realise that because these are crucial issues. But I also think as well that our sector, working with other partners, will be absolutely crucial to solving some of these intractable problems going forward. We won't be able to do it on our own, but these solutions will not be solved without the input of the engineering, construction and infrastructure sector. And I hope and I trust that the politicians, whether at NYC, Climate Week and elsewhere, will be talking, but above all listening and hopefully engaging with the experts who really do know what they're talking about, and hopefully will look beyond just the cost of things, although we're not downplaying that, but they will see that there is real value in engaging with this sector in order to ensure that we do achieve hitting those climate targets, which are so vital to the future of the entire planet upon which we live. So hopefully come and listen to what our sector has got to say and all the people in this room, because you will get the right answers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. For those who doesn't know, Mr. Walker is a guy who can write quicker than anybody can speak. And he's so pretty good at it, because I suspect in a few minutes, all this stuff that we've been talking about, he will summarize in a very sustained manner. I'll make it available. Let me just put it back to you. I started by setting the scene by telling us how big the footprint of FIDIC is, that we represent over 40,000 professional companies, employing over 1 million in 92 countries, and therefore we have a seat at the table. We have the audience, and we know that our engineers around the world are looking for a nature-based solution to combine with their traditional approach. That was my opening campaign. Then I invited, Basma to talk to us about the whole essence of what it is about. What is the subject issue? And how does it impact our industry? Why do we need to embrace it? Then I move on actually by asking, how is the partnership working? And I think that was where Evan come in and said, well, you probably think the engineers and the naturalists, they don't work together and they're always on the opposite. But he actually said, no, there is a complementary issue. We both share the same passion, the same vision to find a nature-based solution. That's what brought FIDIC and WWF together. And that relationship is building. And from what I hear from you, this is the beginning of a new chapter, because this is just version 1. There is more to do. And we'll be looking to produce the second version, a third version, a fourth version by working closer with our members and by touching base and by having feedback and working together. And he also talked towards the end about training people in Mongolia, in India, and Nepal using some of the solutions that's already been in place. So I was delighted to also have Joe go through the whole report, dissect it, chapter and verses, and tell us how they broke it down into sectors and all the issues that comes through and how you can actually look at it as part, what benefit do you want to get out of the report? I like that. She touched on it. Depending on what you want, there is means of going through different sector, different subsector to look at the research and take the research into a different level and bring something contextual to it that is an example. I was really pleased to hear that Then Rowan talked about they're actually producing a report, another report, very similar in alignment. And it seems to me that we are both on the same wavecom. We are both working on the same agenda. And I hope when that report is published, I should be back in Geneva by that time, Rowan, and we'll publish it together. And I actually look at how that report can be used. What I then pick up during the conversation was, look, there's a lot of issues about the cost-benefit analysis. How do you analyze this, and how do you really make sure that you can make use of it? My take on it is that we need to think outside the box. We need to think a different way of evaluating the issue. And I think the comment that came actually, from, Evan was about change of policy. And I like that. Change of policy in the procurement. How do we look at the procurement process and modify the policy on the procurement policy so that nature-based solution can be built into the system? So all in all, it seems a lot is being said. I hope there's been some food for thought. People take a lot of message out of this. And I know Andy Walker in his usual form will summarize all the conversation into a one-pager, which we get across and make available to everybody. So with that in mind, I'd like to thank my panelists, all of them, for the bring to the table. I want to share the book. It's available. It's downloadable. You can actually download it through, the stuff you've got on the screen. Please pick it up and have a look at it, digest it. Most importantly, don't just put it on the table. Read through, use the example, give us feedback. And if there are case studies available there that you can bring to there, please let us have it. We want to work with you so that we can produce version 2, version 3, and version 4, version 5. More important, if you have any suggestion on how we can improve this, please don't hesitate to talk to us. So on that note, I want to thank, AECOM, WWF, and our friend from UNEP for all the support that you're giving. And I hope everybody who's on the line has enjoyed the conversation. I wish you all the very best. Thank you very much, and keep in touch and keep an eye out on what is happening within FIDIC world. Thank you.